we are going to get started on this presentation. Super excited for this one. You all should know it. You signed up for it, but it is Synergizing Apple and Windows Ecosystem, the role of AI-driven IT documentation. We have Nadir Merchant here to speak with you today. He's from IT Glue, and he is the CTO. So as we were chatting earlier, we are both in the nerd position here at JNUC, like most of you. And IT Glue started 10 years ago. They now have 15,000 customers using them, which is pretty incredible for the scalability that they've seen. And their ultimate goal is to make technicians more efficient. So I ask that you hold all your questions till the very end. I think we'll have just a little bit for Q&A at the end, but I will run around with the microphone as questions come up toward the end, and I will pass it off to Nadir.
Thank you, Morgan. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today. This is my second JNUC. I was at San Diego a couple of years ago. I didn't get to make it last year, but IT Glue was here. So I'm looking forward to being able to talk to you about IT Glue and how we're leveraging AI to make IT teams more efficient. So we started IT Glue about 10 years ago now. Clicker working? There we go. We started IT Glue about 10 years ago now to solve the problem of information sprawl in IT organizations. And we've started leveraging AI now to accelerate what we can do with documentation and make it easier to manage the lifecycle of documentation. So we're going to go through exactly what that looks like today. But first, let's just take a minute to look at what's going on around us, because the world has changed a lot in the 10 years since we started IT Glue. Right, we've seen a continuation of the substantial proliferation of IT. In today's world now, everybody is a technology company. We're no longer thinking about the world in terms of there are technology companies and then there are brick and mortar companies. Now everybody is a technology company. Think about very traditional, rustic brick and mortar businesses like John Deere. John Deere is now a technology company. They make farming equipment, they make tractors and front-end loaders and bobcats, but the machines now are equipped with sensors and IoT devices and all kinds of automation in order to make a farmer or a construction worker more efficient in using these tools. So John Deere is now a technology company. Think of them as they're one of the most, rudimentary in today's world, companies in the world, very, very traditional kind of brick and mortar type of business, but now they're a technology company. Their technology is one of the most important things they can do because that's their competitive advantage and why their equipment is better than anybody else's. Now everybody thinks of Netflix as a technology company, right? That's a standard, right? They're a Silicon Valley giant, but they started off as a DVD rental company. They actually shipped physical DVDs to your house. They weren't really a tech company back in the day. Today, they're a standard. They're a staple, right? They created the entire long format streaming. So the entire world is becoming technology companies, and this has created a massive proliferation of IT. IT is so much more ubiquitous. It's so much more complex than it ever has been in the past. We have more users. We have more endpoints. We have different types of endpoints, IoT devices, mobile devices, tablets, all kinds of cloud assets to manage. So the environment is substantially more complex. And this creates a massive amount of information sprawl in organizations because technicians don't know what is going on. They don't know, they can't keep everything in their head. So they have to use information systems to be able to tell them what's going on. And very often, they're jumping into different tools in order to find this information. It doesn't live in a single place. So you have all these different tools that they're using to manage their information. And a technician is jumping between 2 or 3 or 4 different tools to solve a problem. Imagine you have to update the firmware for a switch. Well, I need to know the IP address of that switch. I need to know how to actually do that. I need the password to be able to log in. So very basic task that should only take a few minutes requires me to go into 3 different tools in order to be able to execute that action. At the very least, I've got my asset management tool. I've got my SOP tool, very often like a wiki, a Confluence, SharePoint, something like that, Google Drive, we hear a lot. And then a password management tool, maybe 1Pass, LastPass, something like that. Well, IT Glue exists to bring all of this information together in a single tool, so that way a technician doesn't have to waste time looking for information. They're not jumping between these different tools. On average, technicians spend 9.3 hours per week simply looking for information. It's a huge, huge waste of time and a massive burden on them. Furthermore, they can't manage what they don't know about. What happens when somebody brings their own device to the organization? What happens when somebody plugs in something that they're not supposed to? If they don't see it, they don't know it exists, they can't manage it. And the final complexity is we're doing this all in duplicate, because almost every environment today is a mixed environment, right? You've got, if it's a heavily Mac environment, you've still got that one person, two people that want their Service Pro, and they can't live without their Service Pro. And if they have enough clout to make it happen, it probably means they're an important person. Probably means they're an executive, the CEO, CFO. CFO's like, I can't do Excel on a Mac. There's no way. Well, they got a Windows machine. Well, guess what? You have that one Windows machine, doubles the complexity in your environment, because you still need a separate set of tools to manage it. So it might only be 1% or 2% of your asset base, but it's a doubling of the tools, because for every endpoint management tool, every integrated system to that, you need a duplicate system. So it massively makes the environment much more complicated, further proliferating that information sprawl. So this is really what IT Glue is all about. This is about addressing the imbalance in the budget and the headcount in managing IT, because we've just doubled the amount of effort and systems that you have to manage, but we didn't get double the headcount just because the CFO wanted a Windows machine. So IT documentation powered by AI is our solution for this. IT Glue makes it easy to be able to manage all of the information you need from a single place. We bring all of the different types of information into a single tool, so your technicians don't need to go jumping around between all of these different types of tools to find this information. You've got your asset information, whether it's hardware or software asset information, your passwords, your SOPs, all of it lives in a single solution, and it's connected together to make it easy for technicians to be able to do their jobs. Ultimately, we want to turn every single technician into a know-it-all technician, that guy or girl who's been there for 10, 15 years, that knows the environment inside and out, that knows every SOP, that doesn't need to go and ask people for help or dig for information. They have it all at their fingertips. Well, having it all documented in a single place where a technician has easy access to it and they know exactly how to find it, creates that type of environment. It creates a situation where everybody gets to behave like that know-it-all technician. Now, one of the big challenges with documentation is actually getting things documented and making sure that documentation stays up to date. So IT Glue helps with that as well. Starting with the creation of documentation, we have a huge plethora of integrations in IT Glue that make it very easy for you to lay down what we call the scaffolding of documentation. All of your asset information, all of your structured documentation comes into IT Glue automatically through over 100 integrations that we have, whether it's ServiceNow, whether it's Jamf Pro, Microsoft. We integrate with all of the different tools in order to bring all of your configuration information, all of your endpoint information, and all of your contact and licensing information into IT Glue fully automatically. If we don't integrate with a system, well, we have a discovery engine built in where we can discover that information directly in your environments. So we have a collector that scans the environment and brings all the information into IT Glue, ultimately giving you a structured documentation system that has all of your core data in it. We call this data the core assets. Your core assets are all of your structured information about your environment that we've automatically collected, whether it's your config information, your contact information, SSL certs, domains, all of that comes in automatically, and those are your core assets along with your SOPs. SOPs, we can't collect those automatically, but you can import them into the system We have a huge range of import tools, including a migration tool from other tools like Confluence and SharePoint. So you bring them in, and you have a structured system where every single location that you're managing looks identical. So you go into this location, and you can see all of the structured documentation for this environment. On the left-hand side at the top, we see our core asset data. This is our building blocks for our documentation. All those things that I just talked about are your core asset details. And then we've got what we call the flexible assets. They're the ones that are down below. Flexible assets are customized assets that are built for your environment. We have flexible assets built into the system that you can then take and modify, or you can create your own from scratch. But flexible assets allow you to document any type of unique situation for your business that maybe we didn't predict or we don't have a structure for. But it's important that we give you the tools to be able to create structure for it, so that way it's always the same. That information is documented in the exact same way, whether you're dealing with one school over here or another school over here, or one manufacturing plant versus another. Whatever your environment looks like, whenever you're looking at the information, it needs to be the same, so that way a technician knows exactly how to find information. So not hunting for that documentation. And when they go look at the document, it looks the same. These documents are structured assets, so they're not just text that somebody's just blurted out into a page that you have to go hunt and find information for. This allows a technician with just muscle memory to know exactly where to look. They don't have to read the screen. They just their eyes jump right to the specific piece of information that they have or that they need, because it's entirely structured. So the overwhelming majority of the documentation in IT Glue becomes this type of structured data to make it easy for technicians. We automate the creation of those flexible assets as well. Not all of them, but many of them. So we will actually connect to your networking environment if you're using networking kit that we integrate with, and we will create for you the documentation for your LANs, your WANs, and other similar types of things fully automatically, so your technicians don't have to go and manage this themselves. The final core building block of documentation is what we call related items. Related items sounds very simple, it sounds very straightforward, but it's very powerful. A related item is what connects documentation together, so that way a technician knows when they're reading an SOP that this is the password related to that SOP. Or if they're looking at an asset, they want to know, how do I do something for that asset? They've got all the related SOPs for that asset connected to it. Or the password is also connected to it. This saves them the burden of having to go look for this information. We're instead presenting it to them to make it available at their fingertips. And this we do automatically as well. So let's say we pull in an asset from Jamf Pro. We pull in some device, workstation. And then we have a contact that we pull in from Intune or from Active Directory or some other solution like that. Well, our artificial intelligence engine called Copilot will actually recognize that this device is being used by this specific person, and it'll create that related item for you, that relationship. So that way, anytime somebody goes and looks at this contact, we can say, here's the computer that they're using, here's their workstation. Or if they go look at their workstation, we could say, here's the person that uses that workstation. This reduces the burden for having to create and maintain this documentation from the technician. Now, in situations where we don't know that this is a direct relationship with factual information, instead, our AI engine, Copilot, will actually create suggestions for you. It'll say, hey, it looks like these things are related together. It looks like this password is used for this Wi-Fi access point, and it'll create a suggestion for you. On the right-hand side of the screen there, you see the suggestions. When the technician clicks the check mark, it'll then turn that into a related item. If they click the X, it'll go away, never to be seen again. The nice thing about this system is it'll learn from the more you interact with it. Every time somebody clicks the check mark and accepts a suggestion or clicks the X and it goes away, the system will get more intelligent, so it'll learn your preferences, how you like your environment documented, so that way it can make better and better suggestions over time. So these integrations and this automation that we've built into IT Glue help build the foundation for automating your documentation. But having all this information come into IT Glue automatically doesn't fully remove the burden that you have for maintaining and managing your documentation, because we can have a ton of information in the system, but that doesn't mean it's useful. We also have to think about how do we curate that documentation so that way technicians aren't looking at stale or bad information. And very often this problem gets worse over time, because the more information that's in a system, the lower the quality is. It tends to degrade because there's entropy. Documents that were created 2 years ago may not be useful today. So IT Glue's AI engine helps with solving this problem by making it easy for you to curate your documentation. We start with some fundamental, just basic features of IT Glue that lay the foundation for doing this, and then we layer on the AI to make it easier. So IT Glue has the ability to archive data today. So you don't have to delete it, you can just archive it, allows you to bring it back easier. Removes the anxiety that people have from deleting things. Why do we hoard documentation? Because we don't know if we're ever going to need it again, so nobody wants to delete anything. Well, just archive it, it's not a big deal, because it always comes back. We have flags built into IT Glue, so you can create a life cycle around your documentation. This document needs review. This document might be stale, somebody should go check it out. This document is good to go. This document's a draft, maybe you shouldn't use it yet because somebody's still working on it, right? But the flags give you that basis to create a life cycle around your documentation. And then we have expirations. Expirations exist for objective expirations like domains and SSL certs. We say, hey, this thing is actually expiring. You need to go do something to keep it up to date to make sure it doesn't stop working. That's built into IT Glue. We automatically track that. But we also have expirations for things like documents. So you can say this SOP is only good for 6 months or a year, and then I want somebody to review it and make sure it's still relevant, or archive it. If not, update it maybe if it's changed, or simply change the expiration date another year. So you can build, again, another life cycle around that documentation to make sure your SOPs stay good and you're not looking at stale information. Now, where the AI could take this to the next level is through what we call Copilot for Smart Assist. Smart Assist is a tool powered by Copilot to help make that curation even easier. So we can help you identify unused documents, which documents are expired, which documents are duplicated. This one is particularly tricky because if you're just looking at your documentation, they might not be the same, but they might be duplicative. If I write an SOP for something and you write a similar SOP 3 months later because you didn't realize I already had one, we're going to use different words. It may not be obvious on the surface that these things are actually the same. Well, our detection will actually identify those and help you clean them up, saying, hey, look, these two SOPs look like they're trying to do the exact same thing. We'll also let you know which is your most useful documentation, so you could make sure that they're at everybody's fingertips and people know this documentation is super useful. So now, we've automated the creation of our documentation. We've laid down the foundation of having high quality documentation by curating it and making sure we don't have any stale data in there, making sure that people are looking at the documentation and tuning it for quality. But it's still not useful if people aren't actually accessing the documentation. Great, I got all this information in IT Glue, but people are still running around shoulder tapping each other, asking questions instead of going and looking at the documentation. So how do we help that? Well, we have to make it accessible to people. We have to make sure that their documentation is at their fingertips. This is one of the biggest time sinks that we hear about in the survey data that we've looked at around documentation. So IT Glue does this in a few different ways. We have a mobile app, so everybody has their documentation at their fingertips. They can access all of their IT Glue information at their mobile app. Face ID, they're in, it takes a few seconds. We also have a browser extension. Now, our browser extension, because IT Glue is a password manager, it does store passwords, it functions very similar to like a LastPass or a 1Password, where we can automatically fill in a login form for you, allow you to access your passwords and things like that. But it goes far beyond that. It allows the technician to access the full range of documentation from the browser extension. And they don't even need to open the extension to do this. They can search the documentation and they can read documentation simply by using a few keyboard shortcuts with the keyboard. So they could be inside of Zendesk, inside of Jira Service Desk, they could be inside of a cloud management tool, say they're on the Meraki portal and they want to be able to make a change, they need to look something up. Well, I'll hit the Q key on the keyboard, type a little search, they see a preview of the document that they want to see, they can copy and paste it into the portal or just learn the instruction of what they need to do, all without ever having to leave the context for what they're doing. They don't need to have another tab. They don't need to authenticate separately, assuming they have a session, of course. All of that happens automatically and makes life super easy for the technician. If it's easy for them to access documentation, they're far more likely to do it. We also bring documentation to technicians in other tools. So if they're using Autotask for their ticketing system, or they happen to be using Kaseya BMS for their ticketing system, we have a feature called suggested documentation, where we publish documentation right inside of the ticket. We look at the contents of the ticket, and then we find documentation that's specific for the problem and present it to the technician, so that way they have the right information at their fingertips inside of their documentation. Somewhat similarly, we do this with a few different endpoint management solutions where they can access documentation while they're remote controlling an endpoint. They can also access passwords and automatically use them to log into the machine. They don't need to copy and paste the password into the login screen. IT Glue does that all for you. They simply click the button inside of the endpoint management solution, and they get taken into the solution. Organizations adopting IT Glue get substantially more productivity out of their engineers. They manage more endpoints per technician than your typical multifunctional IT environment, where you're seeing about 100 endpoints per technician. IT Glue organizations, on average, are managing 250 endpoints per technician. So we've automated the creation of our documentation. We've curated it to make sure it's good. We made sure it's accessible to people. But there's still one final piece of the puzzle. We need to make sure that the life cycle of the documentation is well managed, so that way we can be confident that the documentation is being well curated and that it's of high quality. So this is where orchestration comes in. Orchestration makes it easy for you to manage the life cycle and governance around your documentation. We do this through our workflow engine. To begin with, our workflow engine can give you alerts or trigger automations for many different types of things. You got passwords that are expiring, documents that are expiring, SSL certs, domains, any of these types of things. You can manage login events. You can alert when passwords are being accessed. If you have high sensitivity passwords and you want to make sure you know when they're being accessed, if you want to pump this into a SIM and manage it that way, you can do all of these different things with the workflow engine in IT Glue to make it easy for you to manage that governance and the life cycle around your documentation. Some very common use cases for this would be to create an approval process for documentation. So somebody publishes an SOP or some other document, and you want to make sure you have a structured way to have somebody else review it, read it, and then publish it. You can do that using the workflow engine in IT Glue. So where we're going with this is what we're calling robotic process documentation. This will allow you to connect your checklists that are in IT Glue, and a checklist is a structured SOP, to actions that are executed by other tools like Jamf Pro. So when a technician is looking at a checklist, like you see here, they will see little action buttons. The little dog that you see on the right-hand side, that's Cooper. Cooper is the face of Copilot. Cooper will actually then, when you click on Cooper, go and execute that specific action if you've connected it to the third-party solution. So it doesn't exist yet. This is where we're going with the Cooper Copilot in IT Glue. So these things together come together to form that life cycle of documentation creation all the way through to governance and orchestration. Ultimately, all of these things come together to make it easier for technicians to be able to do their jobs so they can manage more endpoints and make the business more effective without having to scale the IT organization. So we're at booth 318. If you'd like to learn more or come have a demo, we'd love to see you there. Feel free to check us out. We do have a decent amount of time left because I moved very quickly to save some time for Q&A. So at this point, Morgan's going to run around with the microphone if anybody has any questions. Looks like we've got one up here in the front.
I don't know if I got a loud enough voice.
We'll make sure folks in the back and on the stream can hear you.
So documentation is still maintained by us itself, but you guys just
have it connected into one place. Is that correct?
So it depends on the nature of the documentation, right? So your asset information and anything else that we automatically document, we'll keep that up to date. So if it changes in ServiceNow, it changes in Jamf Pro, it changes elsewhere, we update that in IT Glue. It changes in Microsoft. Your SOPs, where you've actually written out instructions, step 1 to do this, step 2 to do this, that you'll have to manage yourself.
Sounds good. I'll be back then.
So 2 questions. First one being, when we're talking about the expiration of things, are those are certificates like Wi-Fi certificates and other certificates? Are those included in that?
Yeah, so SSL certs and domains, if they're publicly accessible, yes, we'll pull in that information automatically, and then we will document the expiration dates. You'll have to set up a workflow rule to be notified about it or to take action on it, but you'll see the expiration date in IT Glue, and then you can do what you want with it from there.
Okay. What about certs relating to Jamf specifically? Like I know Jamf notifies you when your certs need done, but are those also pulled in?
Yes.
Okay. I forgot what my other question was, so I guess that's it.
If you think of it, come forward.
Hi. So how about migrating other documentation products to IT Glue? Like if somebody is using Atlassian or something, how do we migrate and implement IT Glue?
Yeah, so for Atlassian Confluence, we have an importer, so you can export a space or multiple spaces, and IT Glue has an importer that will interpret that. But for the majority of migrations to IT Glue, a lot of the documentation comes in through our integrations, so you don't have to necessarily specifically do an import because you just connect the different tools that you're using, right? You drop in all your credentials for Jamf and ServiceNow and Microsoft and whatever tools that we're integrating with, and then we just pull in all your information. It's really just the SOPs that you need to get in there. So that, again, Confluence, we would do that, and any other tools that you have that in there, we could do it. Microsoft or anything like that, you just import it.
Thank you.
For tools like password keepers, like we use like Delinea. Is it backwards as well? So like if we create a password or a secret within IT Glue, will it feed back into, or it only pulls information?
So we don't integrate with that password management solution, and I'm not super familiar with it.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, the only kind of two-way integration that we have with any sort of password would be with Active Directory, Entra ID, and Microsoft 365, where we will do rotation of passwords in those solutions. But other than that, it replaces your password manager. So if you have a LastPass, 1Password, Delinea, or anything like that, you would do an import into IT Glue, and then that would become your password source.
Okay.
How does licensing and pricing work, and is there a difference between commercial and education?
It's licensed per technician per month. It's $42, and there's no difference in the different verticals.
So if we set up IT Glue while originally using like Datto, but wanted to switch over to something like Ninja, how well would it adapt to removing one integration and setting up another? Would we have to worry about duplicates for users or information, or would it recognize that a lot of similarities and simply adapt them?
Yeah, so IT Glue goes through what's called a matching process every time we pull in asset information. So we will look to see if that asset already exists, and then we will match it to the record that already exists in IT Glue, so you won't get duplicates in that scenario. What you will see, let's say we have information coming in about an asset from multiple sources at the same time. Maybe you've got it in Jamf Pro, and then you also have it coming in through Intune, or you have it coming in through any other source. You'll actually be able to see the information, the unique information from all the different sources on the main screen, and then you can actually click a button called Compare, and you'll actually see, okay, this information comes from this source, this information comes from that source, and we'll show you the full range of documentation. But we only show you the unique stuff. So if you get the IP address from one source, the IP address from another source, we don't show you the IP address twice on the default view.
Any other questions? If you want to raise your hand, I'll bring the mic over.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much all for listening to me today. If you do think of any questions or you want to come check it out, please see us at the booth, booth 318. Thank you.